Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you're joining in from today. Welcome to another live session at the Reactors. My name is Rav, and I'm the program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be kind, ask a lot of good questions. The chat is open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Today, we have a very exciting session with Kevin. He's going to be talking all about your Microsoft Search and Copilot beyond MS365, which I think is pretty interesting. But with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Kevin, and he will take it from there. Hi, Kevin.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Rav, and thank you everyone for joining me. I'm going to do a little bit of shameless promotion here because it's actually my birthday today, so I'm giving some of my birthday time up for you to take you through this. So even if you don't enjoy it, please do a little celebrating with me and pretend and give me that backing and peace from there. So I'm going to be talking about Microsoft Search and Copilot today. Obviously, Copilot, very big topic, very excitable, and not just Copilot itself, but how you can extend. I'm going to talk about today a way of extending that using the graph connectors and how easy that can be with Azure Logic Apps. So whether you're a full pro code developer, whether you're looking more at that low code side of things, this will be relevant for you. A little bit about me. I've been working in, jumping too quickly. Been working in the modern workplace space around Microsoft for about 19 years. Started off over in financial services and then moved over to the consulting side. Do a lot of speaking at conferences and user groups. I've also got a podcast, The Copilot's Connection. If you go to www.copilotconnection.com, myself and Zoe Wilson talk a lot about Copilot every couple of weeks, and just come back from Seattle and the MVP summit and have a whole heap of interviews to share out. So lots of thoughts and perspectives from that without breaching the NDA before anyone worries on that. But let's get back to today. If my slides decide to behave. Let's get back today. I'm going to be talking about what are graph connectors themselves. So giving that overview of how they connect. I'm going to talk about how you can create those within your environment in Microsoft 365, and then talk about those endpoints of how they're actually used. And because they always come up in questions, don't worry. I'm also going to be talking about the cost and the licensing needed at the end as well from that. But we're going to start off with the search story about what is Microsoft Search and what you can actually do with that, because this is where that story began. And in fact, this slide here came up from Ignite in 2019 when Microsoft Search was announced. And it was all about having that one capability, that common search across every experience you were looking at. Now, I haven't changed this, so you may notice the odd rename that's happened in there across the years, but this was at the back end to this. It was that common capability that came through and wasn't just about search. It was also bringing forward some of those AI capabilities in that understanding. There were things like the ability to recommend bookmarks, to recommend links in the back ends for search, and also by using the power of the graph with that Bing technology, it understood who you were. It understood who you connected with. It understood the details you were doing. And that brought this architecture together. It brought through that search administration, those applications, whether it's SharePoint, Office.com, or now Microsoft.com, Teams, Bing, etc., all into one place. And it took all those different elements within there that would feed into that single search service, that single index result. Now, depending where you were, it would be context aware. So it would know that you're more likely in Teams to want to see Teams content, but ultimately it would be using the same details underneath. So if you were looking across systems, it would allow you to do that in one place as well from that. So if we look at this, for example, if you were in SharePoint and you're searching within SharePoint, you could bring back other information such as people and items from there. And you'll notice down there that there's this graph connectors index ingestion service, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. First of all, to be talking about what it can show. So you can see here examples from in SharePoint SharePoint. As you start typing, it will start to bring those results back straight away for people. It will start to bring that different information picked up from there, and then you can extend and show more results. But those of you who may come from a SharePoint world going, yeah, we've been able to do that for years, Kevin. Why should I care about that? There was more to it because it would also search within the images as well, not just not just the images that had it in the title, as you can see there for marketing, but down here within this planner page, because it had marketing within the text, it would actually pick up that information as well. And even Power BI, if you were talking about things like website within here, it would pick up within your data. So it's starting to expand beyond additional things. So by default, you'll be able to pick across those files, those sites, those pages that are coming through, news articles, people, those Power BI and images as well. But what about your own content? What about things that were not in Microsoft 365? What about extending beyond that? There's people who remember perhaps Fast Server that came along. Oh, what was that? I think it was SharePoint 2007 or 2010. Long time ago for many people on there. And that allowed you to bring in pipelines of all sorts of information. How would that work in this world of Microsoft Search? Well, it is all about your own content. It's about putting in those extra items into the pot of things, into that extra information. If we come back to that, it's about connecting those external data sources, wherever they may be, into this same service. It's about bringing that information through from other things, which could be third-party services like ServiceNow, like Workday, but it can also be your on-premises data. Those could be file shares. It could be your custom applications and bringing data into that same search experience that's coming through from there. And the way to do this is through the Microsoft Graph connectors. These connectors fed into the rest of the graph. So where you had your tasks, your teams, your chats, your calendar, all that information that was already within Microsoft 365, you could pull out that on there through three different ways. There are a set of pre-built connectors within there, powered by Microsoft, of things like SQL Server, those file shares, even MediaWiki and external wikis you could bring in, and just follow through a wizard to do that. But there's also partners who've created these pre-built connectors that you can purchase from those partners to cover across a much larger area. You can broaden out this aspect. So you could look at things like OpenText and SAP, for example. But you don't just need to go to those partners. You can also bring that API up itself, and you can build your own connectors into things there, which could be your custom solution, or you could decide that some of those partner connectors aren't there. Where you have that development capability, you could build these things yourself as well. So there was two different ways of connecting with that. The simplest is around the connector SDK, and there's some links there. In fact, I will share those out afterwards to bring through to people. And you could connect up your line of business apps. And really, this is for a hosted solution. So with this, you'd need to host it on either an on-premise server, or you'd have to spin up some infrastructure as a service, host this item that ran as a Windows service and pulled that information needed through. And then you can develop your interfaces to pull and use that information. Now, I'm going to be honest, I've never liked this version. I found it painful having to host something, having to run that as a service, maintain that server. It's just a bit of a pain from there. Whereas actually this search and indexing API, it exposes those connectors through the graph. So you make graph calls to set up the connectors. You make graph calls to push your index in there. I found this a much more area where you can have control, and you can run it through platform as a service. So you can put this in your Azure services where you're not having to run and maintain a server for that as well. And it's that area I'm going to focus on a lot more today. If we look at that, the way it works is you have your external data within there. So it could be shares, it could be your on premises Azure DevOps or a cloud DevOps that pulls through there. You build this connector that goes through within there. You ultimately define your schema, you define what you're looking for, and you load that into the graph within there. And that builds the connection and exposes that information through those Microsoft 365 experiences in the cloud on there. And how you get that in there, well, I'll be honest, it's kind of up to you. I'll show a link later to some samples, but there's ones there you could run as a PowerShell script. You could run it as a web API, or as I'll show a bit more today, if you're more on the low code side, you could run it as Power Automate, or you could be a bit better and run it in a more controlled way within Logic Apps. Now, I'm well aware that I've talked now for about 10, 11 minutes, and I haven't really mentioned the C word. So we also want to cover into where this fits in terms of the wider aspect of Copilot extensibility. And it's really within this graph. If you're extending Copilot, there's two key ways of doing that. There's the plugins, which they do things. They make tasks happen. They allow you to, log a new ticket, to maybe request something from an area. It could be create a new user story in Jira. It could be request leave within Workday. It could be log a ticket within ServiceNow. It could be to update your ERP system with a specific value. And they do this through 5 different methods. You can create these custom prompts. They're really not connecting to third-party systems. They're not connecting outside of that, but they allowed you to return information based on that customized prompt on there. So you can kind of curate the message that you want to come back when people ask for specific things. You've then got that capability with these connectors to use the Power Platform connector. So if you've built a custom connector or you've got some of those existing third-party ones, you can feed that into Copilot. And that can either do those actions, or it could give you that very live connection. So where you want to see that data straight away, that's where a plugin would fit in. The big one that you'll hear more and more about is around Copilot Studio and the ability to create extensions through that. And that gives you that easy low code solution through drag and drop actions that you can build up your route and flow through there as well. If you're more onto the pro code side, then there's some great Teams message extension samples within there that you can either connect to another API or build maybe your bot framework capabilities. If you've come from that world, then you can build that interaction within there. And then finally, there's the OpenAI plugins. When OpenAI first came out and their extensibility model was around the plugins, then you've got those APIs that you could use. So if you have elements built there, you can integrate that into Copilot as well. But the other side, and what we're focusing on today, is these connectors. So these graph connectors that were there originally for search also feed that information into Copilot. So you could look at, for example, your ServiceNow knowledge bases. If you've got all that knowledge that's in ServiceNow or perhaps in Confluence, then you can index that content into the graph and make that available to answer questions within Copilot. And I'll show some examples of this a little bit later as well. But let's go on to how you can actually make a graph connector itself. Let's talk about not that theory, but what it actually means to do that and the process involved. Just going to have a quick check and make sure there's no questions. Lots of happy birthday messages, which is making me smile and do appreciate from there as well. But let's talk about the overall process. I've touched on this slightly. The first step is you make that call to the Microsoft Graph and you register that connector. You need to tell it in there some information, the name, a description, which when we come to the Copilot world is even more important from there about getting how you navigate towards that connector. Next, if you're using this for search, then you also need to register that within your search capabilities, either through the API, and there's various CLI or I was about to say Power Platform, not Power Platform, PowerShell calls that you can do that, or you can do it via the interface itself by going into the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. So you register that you want to use that connector within your search. With search results, you also need to define an adaptive card to render what those results will look like. So you've got control within that power of the adaptive card, and you can put your different results that have come back, those properties, and bring your layout that will look great wherever you're seeing that. So it will give you one way to create that. And then the final process is, given you set up that connector, you need to add those results. And adding those results could be a kind of nightly feed. If you think about how SharePoint search and other searches, they run on a nightly basis, go and have a look and see what's changed and feed that into the index. You can do the same thing with that. But what's great about this is, because you're also got that coded version, it doesn't have to be a feed. You can also trigger this you could put that in via a trigger as well. You can put that information through when it happens. So I touched on that idea of having an ERP system. You could have, every time something through your supply chain changes state, you can push into that index and have that appear within that pace of the index redoing, so within a few minutes. In terms of that initial step of setting up the connector, you do need to create an app registration in Azure AD. I thought I'd updated this. That should say entry ID. So anyone who's keeping note of that, yes, I've lost points on that one. But you set up your app registration within there. You then need to grant permissions for that app registration to be able to read and write to the system. You then make that graph call, as I mentioned, that gives that connection. It gives you that unique ID that exists, that name that's just a bit prettier and easier to understand, and that description that becomes particularly important when it comes to Copilot. And then the final element is the schema. Because if you're creating this index, maybe you're creating a ticketing system, you need to define upfront the properties that exist within that as a schema. Now, let's dig into that a little bit more. Here's an example of a ticket. So you're defining what will be stored. It all gets stored as an external item, and you can see each of these curly bracket sections have different types within there. You've got that ticket title. So this is the name of the ticket that comes through. Here's another one that's a priority. Here's another one that's the assignee. And there's some great, excuse me, content within there in the Microsoft Graph that defines the schema available for those different items. So you can have it as numbers, dates, for example. But it's important to note that this is a flat schema. You can have some child elements to it, but generally you're flattening this out. So maybe you've got your schema of your ticket, maybe you've got the ticket title and you've got team and teams a sub item and things like that. You will need to bring this up and flatten that onto a degree. And we'll show a deeper example in a minute of that. The next call that you make to the graph is around creating those items, creating those indexes within there. And this is where you can see those properties, that ticket title, that priority, who it's assigned to. You can see there within the property that I've put those items. And then you have an additional one, which exists for every item in the index, which is your actual content. I will be honest, this example there is there because it fits nicely in the screen, but you'll probably have a much bigger amount of content. If you think about your SharePoint indexes, this would be your document. This will be your SharePoint page that sits within there. And the same that goes here. If this is your knowledge base, it will be the actual knowledge base itself. Now, I did skip over this top section, but this top section is really important because if you are indexing your content, you want to know that that same power that you have with Microsoft 365 to know that only you are seeing that information. You want to make sure that's the same with your external content. You want to make sure that only the right people can see that data. And that's where this ACL section kicks in. This is the access control list. And you can see, for example, you can define a specific user based on their entry ID GUID on there. And you can either grant or deny access, and it will take this in order. So you could grant everyone access, but then deny an individual. That'd be really cruel, but you could do that on there. This is that definition that you build up that, and you can see you can bring groups. So if you've got those security groups, you can put those in there as well. So you could say, allow the finance team access to this item, but not everyone else. So you can build up within this your actual within your schema as you create those indexes, and you can update that as well. So you'll need to run and make sure that those permissions stay up to date when you change those permissions in your system as well. Now, there was a lot of talking there, and I've tried to kind of give a high level summary, but I don't know if you're like me. I love to see the reality. I love to see something proper and some proper code of how to use this. PowerPoint slides are lovely, but I want to see some reality. And I kind of debated what I could show. I thought maybe dynamics. I could bring all those power of different dynamics items into there. I could bring those ERP that I talked about, maybe field service. I could bring Workday and show some HR information and pull like your vacation tracking into that. Maybe a lovely example of making sure you have the privacy. Could be those ServiceNow tickets within there. But you may have noticed a few images through this of a certain character that comes from a certain show that is available. And I wanted to make this a bit more light-hearted and also give you something that you could very easily access yourself. Now, there is actually available an API for Pokemon. So Pokemon has this publicly available API. And so I thought I'd make that because you can use that when you want on there. And also, I touched on that idea on Logic Apps. I'm a big fan of the Power Platform. I love the way that it opens up the power of kind of code to more and more people. I love being able to get dirty in code and writing things, but I also love that it's not there for everyone. And with Logic Apps, you've got that nice connection through that nice easy drag and drop. But you've also got the strength of additional monitoring. You can bring your ALM story, your application lifecycle management, deploy that up to Azure easily with your bicep files or your ARM files. So you've got a lot more control over what you can do and create with that. And so I decided to go for that. I've created, you'll see today, I've got a setup Logic app that does those elements I talked about, that it creates that connection, it defines that schema that gets created. And that I've created so it can run more than once. It will check and make sure that that connection is there. And if it's not, create it. So you can kind of put it in there, and it will make sure that any changes to your schema you decide to make, that you can easily publish that out as well. The next is the search, and I've kind of got this run at the moment. Your demo you'll see today can just be run on demand. But because it's in a Logic app, I can very easily change that top trigger and change it to a scheduled event. Or I could change it to run from a trigger. Really got to change the timing on this slide because I'm obviously speaking too slowly today. I can change that from a trigger. And that's where the real power of this comes in. And being Logic Apps, it's got a lot of connectors. I will be honest, when I first put together this talking just about Microsoft Search before Copilot came into it, I was using the Twitter connectors. Unfortunately, they've made that a little bit more expensive and a little less open to everyone within there. I'm sure there's reasons behind that. I'm certainly not going to go into that fun and games on this session, but within there, I had the trigger that every time someone tweeted something on a particular hashtag, it would trigger off the flow within the Logic app. And you can do the same. You can connect up to a webhook. ServiceNow has some triggers available within there, so you can build these things up. Unfortunately, the Pokemon API, because it's free, doesn't have this. So I haven't created this one for today, but you will see that available in one of the repos that I'll show to you at the end. So let's go into some demos and talking about Pokemoning your M365. Let me just bring up this and make sure no other questions there. Right, so first thing is, here is the API. I'll make this screen just a little larger. But if you go to pokerapi.co, you can access this and you can see, you can try it out with different things. Here you can see it's run for Ditto, but I could change that and be for Charmander. Actually, let's go for my favorite, which might cause some ruptions, but Psyduck. You can see, you can run this API and it returns a whole load of information back. So it returns their abilities. In this case, it's got the ability of Swift Swim, the base experience. And you can see things like here, it's got the images from that Pokemon crying out on there. It's got the game indices. It's got things like the height, the ID on there. You can see a list of 119 different moves. If you are Pokemon obsessed, this will kind of make you go, "Oh, there's lots there." It has the different generations that are available. If we come down to the bottom, where's that disappeared to? But somewhere in here, it's got where that applies to different elements on there. And it's got a lovely set of documentation. So you can see the evolution of these different elements. There we go. It's just being a bit slow to there. So you can see the family trees, and you've got all this great data to work on. Oh, thank you very much. Those who are saying they can't see that, let me just change that. So make sure you can see my screen. Let's change there and on to screen 2. Thank you very much, Phil and Mohammed. Hopefully you're seeing that now. So I'll just come back a couple of slides. Hopefully you can see that now, and that's showing the Poker API within there. That's showing the calls. So you can see here, you can try it out. And I'll just bring that side up and show that again within there. It's got those different abilities. You can see the different change. Thanks for confirming there, Phil. You can see you've got links to images, so you can make use of the images. In this case, this will be the one crying out. Let's not do that. I don't like seeing side up cry. Instead, you've got the sprites on here, so you can see the default fronts. You can see those shinies. I know my son, I came back from Seattle last week and he just got 2 brand new shinies, was very excited on there. So you've got all that information, and there's a lovely set of the documentation for all the different elements, as well as just a Pokemon. It's got the different items, even the locations you can return from this. So a huge amount of information you can get to for free within there. Oh, sorry, let's come back to slides. I mentioned about building up the schema. So let's have a look at that. Now, this is now available to everyone. So here you can see is the schema that's available for the Pokemon. So I've given it a title within there. Sorry, I've given it a name, but I can also give it these labels. So these labels help with the properties to actually bring it back to kind of say that this is the title. This is what you'd expect as the main property, but I don't want to call it title. That's a little bit too formal for my Pokemon. I want to call it name. So this allows you to provide that additional metadata within that. And I didn't touch on these 4, mostly because they weren't on that example on there, but you can see, you can define for this property, can you query on this? You can define whether you can refine, i.e. whether you can add that property to the left and shrink that down a little bit more. Whether it's retrievable, so whether you can pull this property back, or maybe sometimes you just want it there that you can query on it, but it's not returned in the results. And then whether you want to be able to search within that property as well from there. So you can see I've got things here like this, the order. So this is the order that will appear in, and that's been defined as a double. I've got some others here that you can define as collections. So if I look at the types of Pokemon, like grass type, and I can only ever remember that one. My son's attacked me for this, but you can bring that different collection together. Of course, sometimes I find the collections don't work that well, and I want to kind of bring back everything so I can query it. So in this case, I've also got a type text where I've concatenated all that collection into one single property as well. So there, oops, sorry, shouldn't have jumped ahead. Come back to the demo slide. So come on, machine.
Hi, Kevin. Kevin, I think you're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me again now?
Yes, we can hear you. And also, I think you were frozen for a couple of minutes while you were switching screens.
Yeah, sorry, my machine decided now was a perfect time to lock up. So hopefully that's come back to life
Yeah,
again
all
nicely.
good
You can
now.
meet. Excellent. All you missed while I was frozen was me complaining about my machine freezing. So you hopefully didn't miss too much there. All I was going to say within this, that you've got this schema generator that comes through. So maybe rather than generating JSON, I just found it nice. I like Excel. I know it has its detractors, but I love that ability just to kind of put down, here's my list of properties. I want to define which of those types that they are. And then in a nice list, kind of quickly say what's queryable. I can drag down and very easily create that. And then the final column builds out the JSON, which I can then copy and paste into VS Code and use the formatting. So it still looks nice at the end. So feel free to make use of that. Now, you will see in here, I've also got, for example, the JSON that comes through. This is the big lump of text that goes into the Logic app. And I've got a template that deploys that Logic app right into there. So I can deploy that very easily with Bicep, and there's instructions in the README. But let's have a quick look through. Yeah, I'll just put that. I hope this comes through on everyone's chat. If not, take a screenshot of that. But it's Kev McDonk, S4 MSC Pokemon, and you'll be able to get access to all those activities on there. And if you have a look at my repos, I've got a few other S4 MSC, which is basically samples from Microsoft Search that's available and you can make use of, like ServiceNow. I have a Salesforce one and a kind of semi-working Dynamics one that I probably need to finish off as well. But let's take a look and see what that looks like in the Logic app itself. So I'm going to go in and edit that before anyone notices the failed versions of that from me testing it to make sure it all worked. So you can see here that I've got when an HTTP request is received. So because this is the setup, I only want to call this on a manual basis. So I can run this trigger at any point, but I don't need to run this on a regular basis as well. First job is to call that graph, and hopefully you've got some understanding of the graph, but you can pull together this external connections. And all I'm doing is giving it that name within there, that S4 MSC. And all that's doing is calling this and checking to see if it exists. Because if it doesn't exist, then it fails. And I've just got within here, if I have a look at that configure run after, I'm only going to run this next step if it's failed, i.e. if it can't find that connector, then run this create. And within this create, I've got a couple of the app IDs. I mentioned you had to do that registration on there, and there's details of that in the README as well. So there's my IDs for the app registration, which I have deleted before anyone worries about that. And then I've defined in here my description was on there. A slightly new thing that's come through of enable content experiences. It's just saying it's enabled for search within there, and that will work for Copilot before anyone asks. I've got that ID and the name of it. And I've got then below that schema that I've just copied into here with that extra information that comes through. Sorry, that's not the schema. That is when I'm loading this. I mentioned that adaptive card that gets loaded onto there. Within here, I can load that adaptive card. So I no longer need to go and do that manually. Excuse me. Within the search template, I can build that into here as well. And you'll notice I've set some parameters so I don't give away my secret and tenant ID to everyone watching here as well. Let's shrink that down. So that will create that search connector. Next, I want to update the schema. So that's making a call to that same graph endpoint using that ID that I've created for the connector. And I'm just doing a patch in this case. And this time, this is what's patching the schema that goes through there. So defining things like the weight, the height, the base experience that come through. And I can update that schema if I need to as well. And then I've added a couple of things. I probably don't need this anymore. I've kind of kept them in there over time. What I found was I can just patch this, and if it fails, I just say, yeah, you know what, that's fine. I can live with that, and I monitor it because it goes through there. I should say, obviously, with being Graph, I could make this call through the Graph Explorer at graph.microsoft.com. CLI from Microsoft 365 now also has this command, so you could create some CLI commands because you just need to do this once. I just like the visibility of showing this and being able to see this from within a Logic app as well. Right, let's have a look at the search one and edit that as well. So for this one, again, I've kept this at the moment as I only want to run this on demand, but I could very easily change this trigger and make that to a scheduled one. So this runs every night. This is on my own tenant and I keep burning through my Azure credits. So I'll be honest, that's another big reason why I haven't left this to run. It takes about 20 minutes. So yeah, I can't, I've got to protect my money in some cases. And I would recommend all you do, even if you're using your company's Azure subscription as well. Be well behaved. I set up a few things, so I've actually paged through this. With the Pokemon API, you can get a list of Pokemons that appear, and I want to get 50 at a time, so I can process those and then move on to the next one. And you can see that skip value, I'm just setting that to 0 initially on there. I'm setting that returns count to an empty value. And these are just arrays and types that I'm setting to use as the variables later. Again, if you've used Power Automate, hopefully this is pretty familiar to you as well. I've then got a loop. So I'm going to loop until the returns count, effectively, the returns count that comes through is 0. So this will keep going until I'm not getting any Pokemon returning from there. I then call that Pokemon API. I've got that page size, so I'm bringing back 50 at a time, and I'm doing an offset. So I will bring back 50 the first time, then the next time I'm going to increase that offset by 50 and get the next 50 and the next 50 until it brings back all, I can't remember, I think it's 400 odd Pokemon that runs through. So this is what's retrieving that. I'm just doing a very simple get command. It's a nice example, a nice, easy way to get set up because there's no authentication needed with this. Of course, you can add authentication within there. So you could call the graph, you could call another property, you can define your managed identity, your OAuth within that, but I'm keeping this simple today. Next, I get that response back. I've generated the schema. As I'm sure many of you have used before, I just use that sample payload. And in fact, I can go to that Pokemon API, load the details in there, and that will bring me up the schema. I'll then do a little bit of tweaking. You can see here, whoops, I found a couple of problems where it was certain things like the next one here could be null. So I've tweaked some of those just to make sure that it copes with a string or null for those empty ones. So make sure when you're generating that schema that you've catered for different examples within there as well. And there's a little bit of trial and error always involved in that, especially if you're as scatterbrained as I am. You can see here, I'm just setting that returns count to 0. I'm incrementing that skip value by the page size. So I'm saying next time I go through this, bring back the next 50. I then loop through the results, which is the results from the parse JSON, which is the results from the getting Pokemon. So I'm basically going to run through this step for each of those Pokemon. I just do a compose just to pull out, this case, it's actually ripping out the name of, sorry, not the name, the ID of each of the Pokemon from there, just so I can get that value and use that. And then it's actually returning the URL for each individual Pokemon, because I found when I tried to bring back all the Pokemon, I didn't get all the properties. So I'm just doing an additional call for each of those to get the specific elements for each Pokemon. I'm then passing that. I'm just resetting within here the Pokemon type, and I have changed this to work sequentially rather than pull everything through. I load within that the types, so a Pokemon can be multiple types, so I then load those into the array and I load those into the variable for the type text. And what I've put here isn't needed, but this is just an example because I wanted to talk about the permissions. So I'm saying if it's psychic, I'm going to update that index, and I'm doing it as a put, which means if it doesn't exist, it will create it. If it does exist, it will overwrite it. I would recommend that you build better logic into this on your example and only update things if you need to. Don't update everything every single time just because it's there. I'm just lazy and this is a demo, so I'm trying to keep it simple within there. But you can see I'm updating that. And in this case, where it's the psychics, you can see I'm granting to a particular group. I've created a group there that's set up, and only people in that group will be able to see psychics. On the other side, for anything else that isn't of the psychic type, then it is granting that to this group called everyone. And you can get the ID for your entry ID by going into your, oops, I didn't jump into there in the end, by going into your entry ID and doing a search for everyone. By going into the list of, sorry, not a list of users, into the list of groups and doing a search for everyone. And yeah, that's decided not to come back today. Maybe it was in the users. I'm having one of those moments in there. No, it's not coming back, but you should be able to search that group that includes all users. I'll send that through on exactly how to get that ID out. But effectively, that defines everyone in your tenants that can be set up there as well. Otherwise, these two updates to the index are exactly the same from there. So it is writing that value, it's putting the content. In fact, on the content, I'm just putting name. This hasn't got a big description. One of the things I didn't like about the Pokemon API is I kind of would have liked it to have a description of each Pokemon. And I have toyed with using Azure OpenAI to make a call and say, please describe Pikachu, please describe Charmander, and use that within there. But again, I like to protect my subscription and free credits within there, so I haven't quite got to that point. So it would be nice to add a description for each of those Pokemons rather than just the name. Next, you've got those properties, and with those properties, you need to make sure that you're converting the value that comes back from the API correctly. So because base experience is a double, I'm just converting that into a float. You can see some of those numeric ones. I'm just, if I hover over that, I'm just bringing back that value that comes back as text from the response and making sure that is numeric. And that's it. That loads everything into the index itself. And really all you need to do to get through. So let's jump back to the slides and we'll come back and show you in a sec how they're used. So given that's how you create that index, how does that actually look at the front end? Hopefully your Calmer Than Pikachu is looking there. Now this, as of now, oh, that's a horrible slide. Why is that suddenly gone like that? As of now, there's 3 different ways that you can get to that access for those graph connectors. I've talked a lot about Microsoft Search that you see on there. I've talked about Copilot, so being able to ask questions that return that response as well. The other one is Context IQ. Now, Context IQ, I'll show a demo of this in a minute, but it's that intelligent type ahead capability. So within Outlook, you can say @ and bring back someone's name, and you can actually bring your search connector item. So maybe you've got ServiceNow tickets, you could say @ a ticket 1234, and it will bring back extra information about that ticket, as well as a link to that. So people can hover over and see the results of that, which is particularly useful as well. And it's also something that not a lot of people are doing and not a lot of people know about, but it's really powerful and useful there. So if we look, for example, you stop jumping so quickly. If I search for Apple, you can see I'm returning those results. Stop going through so quickly. And if I look for Apple, it's bringing back that iPhone cable. So you can see down there, I've got my documents, and in line with that, I'm also bringing back results, in this case from ServiceNow, from the service catalog that exists on there. And you can see in this case that content I've brought back the description of that cable on there. So that's the graph one. Now, because that's jumping around so much, I'm actually going to bring that back and show you a live demo from my tenant. In this case, I'm looking for graph. Just make that a little for grass within there. It's bringing back, I have some way, I'm a cub leader, I have some information about the grass area and some clues within there. But if I scroll down, it's picked up those types on there. So ivysaur, which is a grass poison, parasect, which is bug grass. So you'll notice that search is not just using the content, it's not just using the name, it's picking up from those properties as well. And I can filter that down to look at the using that vertical. So if I was just looking for a Pokemon, I can bring that example back. And that service catalog, I've also built something for ServiceNow. I'm not selling any grass in there, but I can look, for example, for an iPad, and you can see it returns those different information around iPad as well. And you can see it brings back the iPhone, but that's because I've got iPad in that description as well. So you've got that power within search itself. Also touched on context IQ, so you can see here, if I do @ I can get to those files, I can get to that people. And if you introduce your graph connectors, you can publish these out to bring whatever you want. So it's not just people and files, you can also bring that through as well. And then the final one is Copilot. Unfortunately, my Copilot environment is my live Avanade tenant, and I'm far too nervous and protective of my job to kind of do a live demo of that. I do apologize within there. So I've had to do a screenshot within this, which I did take from through there, but I can see this is still working. But you can see if I look for how do I get a laptop bag replacement, it has returned the information and it's given me a reference to that knowledge article within ServiceNow. So I could click and obviously with large language models, with generative AI, you want to make sure you check on that information. So you can go back and click on that reference and bring it through as well. And so I'm going to come back to Copilot a little bit more and why I'm being slightly cagey here as well. What I do like is down the bottom, it's also picked up some recommendations. I have noticed recently the quality of those recommendations has greatly improved as well. Now, I talked about those schemas, and a lot of that was around Microsoft Search, but actually, there's been some enhancements to that since the original scope of that that help power the Copilot experience as well. And this brings in a lot of ways that you can help route the information and help Copilot bring back results. So you have these semantic labels. I talked about that, those extra labels where I said it was a title. You can basically decorate your properties to make sure they're more likely to fit these things within there. That's titles example, which I'll show again in a sec on there. So you can also tag those as is searchable as well, which helps Copilot. The URL, see, I can never say this one, URL to item resolver helps you provide those links. So where you have linked to say a ServiceNow ticket or a ticket in your system or a link to another page within your wiki, you can help build the link more effectively within that. I'll show that in a sec. The one that I love most here is the user activities. Because you're using that large language model, you want to be able to weight effectively to say that if something's more active, it should be more likely to return. So if you've got a wiki page that gets a lot of hits, a lot of likes, a lot of comments, that should be higher up in the ranking. And you can actually log those views, those comments that come through in that user activity capability. So as well as doing the index, you could also push something that on a regular basis logs whenever anyone's commented on those as well. And I'll come back to that again in a sec. So you can see here, I touched on that edge searchable. That's something that adds that power that needs to be set for true for Copilot to be able to pick up that property effectively, which does mean if you want to put a property in there that could be retrievable and come back from the results, but not have it used by Copilot, then you could set it as is searchable false and have it just within the search. So you've got a little bit of control within there. And then those labels I mentioned, I think there's 7 of them off the top of my head that allow you to define and say this name property should be related to the title. And that means it's going to be brought back more effectively when you're looking, say, for the name of a Pokemon on there as well, or the title for a Pokemon. Other things are available. So the next one here, and this is more complex, and I will say is not particularly well documented. And the eagle-eyed will go, oh, is that regex within there? Yes, Yes, regular expressions are used within this to get that path from there. But you can define this pattern. This actually came from one of the samples that exists about getting the sample solution gallery. You can bring those sample solutions into your Copilot, so people are looking for those. It will return it and provide that link that exists when you expand the recommended item. So I'm just going to jump back a few slides. Here's that laptop bag replacement. Rather than providing explicit link for that, you can provide that URL pattern that will be extracted, and it will make it more likely to pick that up from other items. So always worth, again, if you're looking for that Copilot capability, to bring this into it as well. And then the final one is this external activity. So you can log it with a date time. And you can see the type of it. So has this item been viewed? Has it been modified, created, commented? An unknown future value, pretty useful thing like that. I'm guessing there's something we need to keep an eye on there, because there could be something interesting coming in the future that I'm certainly not going to get things taken away by mentioning that. But you can see that you can log those items. And again, it just adds that weighting. So you're not providing an information. If it was commented, you're not saying what comment, just the fact that a comment has come through there as well. Now, I do love Copilot. I love the capabilities, but I don't want to duck away from some of the problems and some of the challenges you will face. I've been creating these search connectors for a while. You can do this in a dev tenant. If you still have yours, you can do this in a CDX or your whatever tenants that you have. The problem is Copilot. It has become harder to get that dev tenant. Now, obviously now you could buy a Microsoft 365 account, and you could buy an extra Copilot license for that. But I'm sure many of you are sitting there thinking, yeah, like I have the budget available to do that. So that is one of the challenges that does come up, is how you manage those dev tenants. My experience has been that you have a larger number of people creating these graph connectors. They can build those up, make those deployable, and then you have a single dev tenant that's available that one person has access to and manages. Or, and I love this with the graph connectors, you can actually make those available through the admin center just to a specific group of people. So you can develop your graph connector, have that deployed, but not everyone will see that, and not everyone will have that available in Copilot. You can limit that to certain people, and then they can test that in the live environment with your live data without worrying that that's going to leak out. So that is probably the way I would now be looking to approach that. Certainly, if you don't have that, that budget available, it's the polite word I was looking for, to have a separate dev tenant within there, is to kind of build that message extension in a dev tenant without Copilot, and then test that with Copilot on there. Having said that, the challenges of how it gets to that connector is hard. I have had a real challenge within the sandbox I've got access to, of actually routing through, and especially with Pokemon, where the large language model that Copilot uses has a lot of information about Pokemon. Apparently, a lot of people on the internet talk about it. But because it's got so much information there, trying to get it to route to my graph connector rather than what's in the large language model or what's in my tenant, and yes, I do have documents about Pokemon in my test tenant as well, it has been quite hard. So just be prepared to test that as early as possible and make sure you work out the right prompts that work. I can't say too much, but there is something that is coming that will make this process better on there. So keep an eye out on latest information that's coming on around those prompts to connectors and connecting to those. The final element is, it's lovely doing development. It's great fun. It's great to be able to connect to those things, but you need to work out the value. If you're running this maybe as a service, or even the cost of running that Logic app, the cost of doing the development, what is the value you're getting it? Don't just put lots of things within your index just for the sake of it. Think about what it means to people, how they're going to use it, and think about how you're going to help them use it as well. Because it's not field of dreams. If you build it, they're not just going to magically start using it. As I come back to that, getting the right prompt, just putting this information in there isn't going to magically make Copilot better. you need to guide people on the best ways to use it, make them aware that that connector is in there. So think about that adoption and change that comes, that means you can actually realize that value. We talk an awful lot about the value framework for Copilot, and we're extending that with extensibility for graph connectors and those plugins to also look at the same thing. What value is this going to bring to people? Because you still need to maintain these solutions, and making sure that you balance the effort and time and cost of that to the benefit that people will see. Not just that return on investment, but that value, that improved quality, that faster productivity that comes through with that on there. So make sure you're considering that as the item. And talking of cost, I did say I was going to talk licensing, and I'm not ducking away from that in there. When it comes to Microsoft Search, you have that included in your license if you have one of these three things. If you have an E5, oh, go away. If you have an E5, then you have 500 items per license. So if you've got 1,000 licenses, you've got 500,000 items within there that you can put into that index. So for large organizations, you're not going to be worried about the volume you can go into there. Up to, I think it's, the current million, I think it's 50 million. I don't believe that's changed yet on there, but that is only 5 million per connector. So if you've got more than 5 million items, you will need to look at that. Now, if you have E5 and you have Copilot, ooh, happy days, you're doing well. Then you have 1,000 items per license. And if you have, oh, I might cry now. If you have topics in Viva, then for the next year, while that license still exists, then you'll have another 500 items per license. Obviously, Microsoft has announced that topics in Viva is going away, so you will need to make sure you look at that. If you don't have any of those things, you can still purchase an independent block of index items, and it's charged. You can see those links there, so do feel free to take a screenshot of those. It's charged per block of those, so do have a look at that within there as well. And you can charge those whether you have E1, E3, or E5. And if you have E5 and you're filling up your quota, you can purchase additional ones from that as well. And again, up to that total of 50 million items and 5 million per connector. And this has been gradually going up. So I believe you can also ask Microsoft if you have a case that you want to extend that, you can make a support request to extend that as well. And that's all detailed in these links below there. And I've also included a link to the pricing for Logic Apps. So you'll need to think about the pricing there. Just a few useful links that I will hover on within there. Think about some of your questions if you do have any. I haven't seen any come through in the comments on there, but do if you have some come through, and I'll check with Rav in a sec. But some links here on there. The PMP graph samples, Waldeck, Gary Trinder, and I think Arabia's contributed to these, as well as myself. My ServiceNow connector that's very similar to that Pokemon one there is all available. And I've also included details on the ServiceNow of how you can spin up a dev set tenant for ServiceNow, so you can actually test that out without worrying about having that paid for license. So there are ways to do that. I've also provided links to those connectors. All those schema definitions are all very clearly documented. Apart from the URL to item resolver, that could be a bit better. Of course, it's open, so if you've got a better idea on that, add that in there. I've got details to that pricing. And of course, you will want to get building other things with that Pokemon API. There's also a link to there. But otherwise, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to this. Please go out, look at these connectors. It's so great the way you can bring this information into your tenant. Whether you're using Copilot, whether you're just using Search, you can bring this information into one place. You can have that single way through. But do remember, the AI still isn't perfect. Make sure you're planning for that, thinking about those hallucinations. This was an AI generated image. You know, there's lots of Pokemon I recognize in there, but it can't spell thank you. No, that's not Finnish or something like that. It is just AI not being perfect. It's improving all the time, but make sure you plan for that as well. If you have any questions, please do put that in the chat. I can see one's just come through from Kwan. I hope I've got that at least vaguely right. With such disparate sources, how is this governed when core URL schemas are changed by a source? That's a really good question. One of the challenges you've got is the search connector itself won't actually do that. But the good thing is, once you've put it into the index, it's there. So even if that source, like if the Pokemon API disappears now and goes down for a few days, I still have my index that retains there. I have to manually go through and clear that down. So just because that schema changes, you're not going to lose all that information in the index. What you need to do is to build in that logic. So within that logic app, make sure you've got effective error handling. Again, why I like logic apps, that I know if it fails, I can go through and see from the history where it's failed, diagnose what's happening, test it, and redeploy that from there as well. So do check those things, make sure you've got that capability. Because it's calling it from your code, it's up to you to manage how those schemas change and do from that as well. So it means you only change things when you're ready for that to change. So I hope that answers your question there. Raf, I know we're at time, but are there any other questions?
No more questions, but Kevin, if you could please share the links with me and I can send it across to everybody who registered through our platform.
Yeah, absolutely. I will send that through. And also please reach out to me. I've got my social media links up there. So please do send things there.
We have one question which has just come up from Paolo.
So yeah, Paolo, is the question, just in case people can see it, we've seen the possibility of driving ACL through Entra UPN or the group ID. Is it handled seamlessly with authenticated queries, or is it with explicit filtering? So basically, you have to call the graph as an authenticated user. So you don't, once you've set that ACL, you don't need to do anything more. The graph will handle the rest of the elements there. You don't need to add any extra filtering, whether that's through Copilot, Context IQ, or Search. That's all maintained for you. So I hope that answers the question. I hope I'm getting the right thing there. But as I say, any other questions or any follow-up, Paolo, please do send me a message on Twitter, LinkedIn, or no, I guess you could on GitHub. Feel free to log an issue there as well. But otherwise, thank you very much.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks very much. And a very happy birthday. I hope you have a nice day today. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, and send over those links and I will put them under the description of the video as well once it's uploaded to YouTube.
Great. Thanks very much, Raf.
Yeah, thank you very much. Take care.